Okay, so I think one of the first things I want to do is kind of the same thing I've been doing for our four directions classes. Is just a little bit of a where are we now? A little bit of a review. So warrior training is the four directions practice. There's really no difference. I would say the biggest difference is the mentality. Hmm, yeah, maybe one of the biggest differences is just the frame of mind, you know, um, that a person might have. And here's the reason. Okay, I'm going to go to my whiteboard so you can let me know if things are not functioning properly. Whiteboard, that's the wrong button. Whiteboard, new whiteboard. Okay, so first of all, this practice has a very, I think it has a very wide scope. I think what that means is to a very basic degree. Can you hear me, Shayna? See the whiteboard before I get started? Start saying stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I can't. I don't know. Okay, cool. Um, so we have three really important words. One, establish. Two, elongate. And three, maintain. So really what we're starting to talk about now in warrior training is elongation and maintaining. Now, here is my disclaimer and my caveat, and I'll put them over here. One, so a person could do this practice just to increase basic concentration. You know, maybe they have a reason to concentrate better. Maybe they're in school. Maybe they've just really learned that concentration or being able to focus will improve their life. And so learning to maintain at least the first two directions will help impeccably with that. Now, if a person continues to do this practice, and we're still not quite into a warrior training type of situation yet, and I'll explain why. Because this is warrior training, so it is a little bit different. And it's the exact same thing because it's still the four directions practice, which is still an Qigong practice, which is mind attention practice, which is what we're doing. And I hope this isn't too far on the right-hand side that you can still see it. But the second, if a person is to elongate the first two directions of attention, self-awareness will increase. And this is just to the degree that they do their practice. You know, how much is my self-awareness going to improve and increase? Well, it just depends on how much momentum you're gaining in the practice. You know, we still have a lot of topics. One of the primary topics that I'll probably begin with, which is a principle of this practice, is called leaking power, because that takes away our momentum. But we'll talk about those topics a little bit later. All right, so we have the four directions. We have external, deep, and internal, and we have breath, and we have cognition. I think one thing that Santina kind of picked up on right away is that eventually when we do our practice, we're wanting to connect these different directions. So external doesn't exist independently in an advanced practice. You start to mix your breath with your external environment. You start to mix your breath with your internal environment. You start to mix cognition with breath. And while you'll still have four distinct directions active, it's going to start to feel more like this, which is what we want. We want it to start to feel more like this circle where these directions are really interacting very well and supporting one another. Well, any questions about any of this so far? Because this is where warrior training will pick up. Basic concentration, self-awareness. So if a person is able to establish and maybe do some elongation, hopefully they can maintain it some days, maybe not every day. Internal and external points of attention to get to the self-awareness. Does anybody know why? Like, does that sound like some shit I'm making up? Or why would being able to pay attention to your environment and yourself, because it's body awareness, it's internal. Why would internal and external attention combined do that? Why would that lead to self-awareness? Is that kind of too obvious of a question? It is, isn't it? Like that's just too basic. But does anybody want to try to answer that? Why would that increase your self-awareness?
Well, it's because you're acknowledging or declaring that you're here in your body, connected in some way to the earth. So it's I think there's something about the internal and the external that kind of ground you
They kind of
or
what?
make
Around
you
you? Okay. Mhm.
ground you or make you aware of your own self in space.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good answer. And it just seems a little bit, probably for this group, obvious. Like Ida said, I'm aware of my outside environment. I'm aware of my inside environment. And when I can combine and maintain those two, all of a sudden, I'm able to see myself in space and time, right? I'm able to see my actions. I'm able to see my thoughts. I'm able to see my emotions. I'm able to see how I'm interacting with my environment a little bit better. And we can learn from that. Everything Santina, if we really want to get down to the nuts and bolts, all we're talking about is really feeling. That's all we're ever really talking about. Think about this. What is something that we know exists? Let's say air, right? Air is something that we can't readily see. But how do we know it exists? Because we feel it. We see it. It's a part, it becomes a part of our sensory experience. Well, I see something is moving the trees, so that has entered my sensory experience. I think what people don't always realize is that you are feeling with your eyes, you are feeling with your ears, because that is what is creating the response. So when you hear something and it moves you to tears, right? When you see something and it excites you. So all of our response is coming from sensory perception. So really all we're ever doing in our entire life ever is just feeling it. That's all we can do. If we didn't have our sensory perception, what would we be doing? If we didn't have our emotional soup, we would be like, and excuse the Star Trek reference, but Vulcans. Are you familiar with Vulcans? Has anybody watched Star Trek? Like, I know I got the glasses on and I'm the nerd, but the movies were popular among all demographics. It wasn't just nerds.
Of
But
course, grew up with it.
oh, you grew up with,
Grew up.
yeah. So yeah,
Oh yeah,
what do the Vulcans not have? What do they not have? They don't have something that all of us have.
emotion.
Emotions or yeah,
Emotions. Why do they not have emotions?
because they're not human.
No, no, that's not right. No, they could still have, well, and technically I would argue this point, but I'm not going to. I would argue with the producers of Star Trek because I think it's impossible for any biological creature to not have an emotion. But that's not how we talk about things. So, but yeah, Vulcans don't have emotions because they're ruled by logic. Because the vast majority of our emotions are not logical. And so if you just look at, and that should sound familiar because it could be a very popular technique in redirection is what I call the voice of logic. Nobody is doing anything to me. Why do I feel like this? I can't hear other people's thoughts. I don't know what they're thinking. Why am I considering this? That's the voice of logic. And that's actually used a lot in warrior training. So does all this make sense so far? So Santina, you're really spot on because at a certain point, the internal self-talk relaxes. So if you're not sitting there talking to yourself, you're feeling your life. And that's what this is all about. So really what we're looking for, Santina, is feeling, but without all of the interference. Because we're always feeling. That's why I would say I would argue. Every single human being is feeling an emotion, no matter who they are, what they're doing. They have chemical hormones, chemical receptors, neurotransmitters. if Donna would hear, she would throw out the word nanopeptides and things like that. You know, even fat is considered an organ now because it releases different chemicals into our bloodstream depending on what we're doing. And that's what organs do. They, um, I think the definition of an organ is a conglomeration of similar cells to produce a particular function, which fat cells do that. Does all that make sense? So yeah, we're going to get, actually, that's all we're talking about from the beginning is feeling, but it's very difficult to talk about it that way. Wouldn't it be, Santina, in the beginning? Like in the beginning, it would be very difficult just to tell some, that's actually what law of attraction circles do. Just feel what you want to manifest. And it's like, what? Feel like a billionaire. And it's like, okay, um, I'm a billionaire, I guess. And I'm just gonna fake it until I make it, I guess. Okay.
Hold
No.
on now. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this practice most definitely leads to feeling
One,
in less words.
Jerry, one thing I want to remind you of, though, just real quick, is that this is more of a class atmosphere. So I'm good with questions. Just make sure, if you don't mind, that it's just directly on topic for warrior
I
training,
am talking about
especially.
just
Okay.
what you're saying, Santina.
Okay, cool. Okay, just making sure.
I know
I'm with you. Everything is about feeling.
it was the way you were describing her reaction to her comment, and I was just saying we've talked a lot in this class about how this practice does lead to feeling. Less words, feeling.
Yeah, that's what I
It
said.
becomes it sounded like you were kind of making fun of it, like that's not
Not at all.
accurate.
No, no, not at all.
Oh,
No, I
I
said
thought
our
you were making fun.
practices, no, I said our practice is always focusing on feeling, but in the beginning, we can't talk about it that way. It's very difficult to talk about it that way in the beginning because nobody has a bridge. Like we don't have a bridge to feel like a billionaire. We don't have a bridge to feel, if a person wants to manifest happiness in their life, law of attraction would say you just need to feel it more and then you will manifest it. Well, yeah, but how the fuck do you feel it? Like, how do you get to that point? Like, how do you generate this without hustling yourself, without ignoring things that are happening in your life? And that's where you get a lot of people who say that folks who are spiritual and practicing the law of attraction, sometimes they're doing things that could be in the long run detrimental to their psychology because there is a lot of self-hustle potentially involved. Not even imagination. Yeah, not even imagination, because imagination is an active thing, right? It's not this passive thought that we put in the back of our minds. Okay, and I don't want to get too much off on that tangent because we got to get to the topic for today, which is where warrior training picks up. And warrior training picks up at what I believe will be the height of difficulty in this practice. There's two heights of difficulty, but one we should have started to work with already, and that's called redirection. Redirection is hard. It's very simple. It's very easy to talk about, but why is redirection hard? Am I just making that up? I'm definitely not going to sugarcoat it and tell you that this is the easiest thing that you've ever done. That's how people sell stuff. They want to sell you something and convince you that you will have to do nothing. That's because sometimes certain aspects of certain societies want to reap reward with no effort. They want effortless gain. And whatever. That's not my thing necessarily. So redirection, why is that so challenging? Anybody have an idea? There's a reason. It's a principle-based reason, not according to Ernest. Why is redirection so challenging in the beginning? Or really throughout the practice at times? That's a
Because
big one. Yeah, go ahead.
You have to be aware to redirect.
There you go.
And that's the sticking point.
Yeah.
You're learning to be aware, but to learn to be aware, then you have, it's learning to be aware. That's the tricky bit.
That is a tricky bit. You're right. Like Shayna said, you have to remember to do it. Yep.
And you're ingrained in such a habitual way that it's very difficult to break that.
There you go.
It's simple to break it, but it's difficult to break that because it's what your mind wants to do.
There you
It
go.
wants to
That's
go
the
in
answer.
its normal loop.
That's the answer. So all the other answers were good. I do like, you have to remember to do it because that's true. It is more difficult because we're not in balance and we're trying to pull things together. So that's a challenge. And the habitual thinking. So does the momentum element. It is what we would call the principle of momentum. And it's the habitual thinking from the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, that's gaining momentum, right? Aren't people thinking consistently, constantly? That gains momentum, whether we like it or not. That's a principle. It works both ways. It can benefit us and it can also be detrimental to us. It just depends on how we work with it. But it's a principle. I can't change it. So the more that we do something with consistency, the more it will begin to accumulate. And that's the reason that redirecting thought is so difficult, because it has so much momentum. Does that make sense? We've been doing it probably for 30, 40 years unchecked. And so a lot of times when we think we're doing this practice, we're really still just talking to ourselves. And that just depends on where we are in the practice. But this is warrior training. So I'm just going to tell you straight up. A lot of times we think we're doing this practice. Really check, really observe. You're still talking to yourself. And that's okay. You could still probably be doing this practice, but it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to get to the point where you can interrupt, elongate, and maintain gaps in thought, warrior training, because it's not going to be a cakewalk. Thought has so much momentum, and it's so sneaky, and it's so tricky. It's so easy to hustle yourself. Oh, I want to be thinking these thoughts. It's such a lovely day, and these are nice. Okay, fine, maybe. But are you still thinking from the time that you wake up, from the time that you go to bed? Well, yeah, fine, that's okay too. You still maybe have some of these other things, like better focus in your life, better connection in your life, better ability to concentrate in your life. But if you want to interact with the subtle, it ain't gonna happen. And that's what warrior training is really going to help us do. It's going to help us work through the next two aspects of the practice, which is breath and imagination, and really emphasize those, because at this point, we already know how to redirect. We're already doing it. We already know internal and external. We're already doing it. You're probably already creating what I call the bubble of perception, which is internal and external awareness combined. So now it's time to pick up where things get a little bit more tricky. So Ida, same answer really, right? Why is the breath? Well, this actually has two answers, but one of them is the same answer. Why is the breath so difficult to pay attention to?
Because it's automatic anyway.
That's one big reason.
Because you're doing
Yeah.
it, well, you're doing it anyway, and you're not used to paying attention to your breath
I think
unless
that's the
you're
bigger reason.
doing something with a face mask, or
Mhm.
I don't know. There would be reasons that you would be paying attention to your breath.
Mhm.
Maybe when you're getting your blood pressure taken at the doctor's and you
True.
want to feel calm, something like that.
Yeah, maybe you have really bad breath and you're trying to moderate how much wind you put out there, and you're like, yeah, everything's fine. Yeah. So you have to be aware of your breath so that you don't push too much out because you got bad breath. But other than that, yeah, you're right. Like, it's not something that we're used to paying attention to. So again, it has the momentum of habit behind it. The habit of just not really doing anything with it, because breath uses a nerve that is both motor and sensory, right? So it goes both directions is the bottom line. So signals can go to the lung, and that is how we control how we breathe. And then signals come back up the other direction, and so it's kind of going back and forth. And so it is a part of both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. That's interesting, huh? So that's one of the reasons that it can be automatic, or it can be something that is voluntary. And when you're asleep, it will go back to automatic. So there's still balance. For 8 hours a day, at least, your breath is going to go back to automatic. And then I don't think that most people, even myself, have breath awareness the entire day. I maintain for very long periods, but there could still be times where I lose my breath attention. All this makes sense so far? Now, why is breath so difficult? Now, we've given two really good reasons, but there's another reason, and I'm going to address that today. What is another reason that breath technique is so difficult to elongate and maintain throughout the day? And that's what we're going to address head on today. Do you have any idea? What's another obstacle to breathing throughout the day? This one's a little bit more subtle. You have to practice breath awareness maybe to figure this one out. But the reason that this one is so difficult is because the majority of techniques that we use in our breathing exercises have a lot of manipulation. Like there's a lot of, what's the first thing that yogi tells you to do, or that meditation tells you to do? Breathe in deeply through the belly. And it's like, okay, take a deep breath. All right, like there are millions of circumstances where taking a deep breath is beneficial. I'm not prepared to declare war on breath technique. It's fine. But try doing that all day. Try forcing your breath to be deep from the belly for more than an hour and tell me how you feel. Do you see where I'm going with this? I like to give the example.
Yes, Ernest,
Go ahead.
I'm finding whenever I say to myself breath, I automatically change it.
Mhm.
I'm attempting not to do that. There are some times when I can just notice it, but mostly when I say to myself breath, when I've forgotten about it, I'm changing it. I do like I do a different breath, a different type of breath.
Well,
When I fall off breath attention and go back to it, it's like changing it.
mhm. There's a philosophical debate, Ida, that the moment you pay attention to your breath, you alter it, which is true. So we don't have to be absolutists. We don't have to say no manipulate. Really, what we're doing is how are we, with what degree of intensity and quality are we interacting with the breath? We want it to be as relaxed as possible. But the idea that you're ever going to be able to just notice, the second you notice, you change. Have you noticed that, Ida? So there's a philosophical debate that it's impossible to not alter the breath with attention. But it's to what degree, like how much are you trying to change it? Are you trying to change it a lot, or are you not really trying to change it at all? That's kind of where we want to get to, where it feels like we're not really doing much at all. And we do that with the smooth breath. Shayna, were you about to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree with Ida. Like sometimes I'll check in and then I'll notice that it's shallow, and then I intentionally change it because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not breathing fully. So
Mm-hmm. And there could be circumstances where that's okay, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I'm currently intentionally practicing breathing on areas that I stop breathing. It's strange. Yeah. But let's try it with a certain type of quality, because this certain type of quality will make it easier and more accessible for you to do throughout the day. And the first one is, of course, smoothness. So the smooth breath has been famously defined for us as breathing with the least amount of muscular tension to perform the breath. This comes from the book Just Breathe, and other like textbooks, but the Just Breathe is a good one. It says it very concisely. So smooth breathing is breathing with the least amount of manipulation, with the least amount of muscular tension to perform the breath. And we've practiced with this. One way that you can determine that is you kind of put your finger in front of your nose and how much wind is blowing. And if you were here with me, we could practice more technique probably than we can online. But one thing that can help make the breath smooth is this feeling of filling everything up. So when you breathe in through the nose, you're filling the nose up slowly, right? And so smooth in, smooth out, smooth in, smooth out. If you have a lot of trouble with the smooth breath, that could actually be a sign of, in Chinese medicine, what we would call a potential liver blood pathology. Because the liver meridian in Chinese medicine helps to influence our smoothness. Like the blood moving smoothly through our body will equal us moving smoothly through our lives. Because if the blood is smooth, the qi is smooth. The qi and blood are smooth, all of our body fluids are smooth. If qi, blood, and body fluids are smooth, Shen will be smooth. And if all of that is smooth, smooth. Everything is just really groovy. Okay, I'll take Jerry's question, but does that first point when we talk, and we'll definitely explain this more because I'm assuming that people will have questions as they do this, which will help me to kind of explain it. But what we're looking to do is less noise when you're breathing, like you shouldn't hear it, less wind coming, and it takes practice. It's like, if your breath is short, leave it short. If it's shallow, leave it shallow. But just smoothen it. And you will feel yourself manipulating it. That's okay. It takes a lot of practice before you can just pay attention to the breath. And Ida, I still think that we manipulate it just a little bit by being aware of it. It just happens. But I want to be very gentle with it. I don't want to manipulate it too much. I want it to be smooth and move smoothly. The smooth breath is where it's at. That's the breath that's going to be most likely for a person to be able to maintain throughout the day. Or elongate, if you're just looking to elongate, but then, of course, eventually maintain awareness on the breath. Yes, Jerry, question or comment or concern?
Yeah, I'm going to get my hand down there. Yeah, I think I could probably just Google this, but we're in class and we're talking about it. But is that normal? I find myself not breathing while I'm doing things, and because I'm focusing so much on breath in my practice daily. Like, you probably know what I'm saying, right? I mean, don't we all do it? Or
Yeah, I
yeah,
think we all do it
it's
at different
strange.
times.
Yeah, like I'm pulling clothes out of the dryer. I stop breathing when I'm doing that. As soon as I bend over, pick them up, load them up, and I'm catching myself having to catch my breath because I've just now done a task
Right.
without breathing. And so I'm just giving that some intention to learn to breathe while I'm doing those things. Because I
Yes.
catch myself doing it now that I'm thinking about it. I do it a lot.
Yes. Yes, it's I think the first part of the question, is that common? Yes. Very common. So when you're in a treatment room and you're doing an assessment on somebody, when there's a lot of people, when a person feels a lot of like maybe eyes on them, or they're starting to feel a little bit of like intense like pressure, like, because people are looking at you or they're asking you questions. When people start to go into fight or flight, this would particularly be the sympathetic response, which is energy is moving up, right? We may be more prone to hold our breath. So and that's what I mean by strain, Shayna. So you'll see this also when people are bearing weight or when they're doing any type, it could even be other types of exercises as well. And then people will typically hold their breath. They'll do it when like you're trying to think, like you're trying to come up with an answer.
I'll give you another example. I've been having some dental work done lately, and I always catch myself during my teeth cleaning while she's going around with everything. I stop breathing because I'm getting in the flow of what she's doing. And then I catch myself, it's like, Jerry, you've got to breathe while she's doing this.
Right.
It's a natural to just stop. It's interesting.
It is interesting. And it's not always beneficial, sure. That's why somebody would tell us, oh, you got to breathe, just breathe. Like, don't forget to breathe. When you're about to take a test, right? People forget to breathe. Shayna said when women are in labor, they forget to breathe. When you're bearing weight and exercising, people forget to breathe. When like you're really sad and you're running up to tell somebody your story, they're like, whoa, 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 just breathe, just take a breath. because everything is getting out of whack. Yeah. So it is actually very common, but it will become less common the more you do this practice. You will find yourself not breathing much less often. Mhm. Because of practice, like Jerry said, by noticing it and then filling in the space with smooth breathing. So does that make sense? Smooth breathing. And we can talk about that more because you have to practice it a little bit. And then you'll probably have some questions. And then that makes it easier to direct, is having questions. So when we come back next week, I'll ask questions like about these breath techniques, because I'll give you 5 of them. And they're all smooth. So that's why I start with that. Like all 5 of these are smooth because that's a distinct characteristic of being able to do it interstitially, or in between of our day. Now you can still do, if you're going up a flight of stairs, you can still do more of like an audible breath because you're exerting a lot of force. So it's not like you have to be smooth all day. But what we're looking for is if there's not a need for, a more type of breath, then we don't need to, right? We shouldn't be doing that just for no reason. So what happens commonly is what Jerry said. People hold their breath. The breath tends to rise. The breath tends to become an unregulated mechanism, meaning that because you're not regulating, breath can't regulate. Have you noticed that breath could be a regulation mechanism? Of course, that's why it's in the 4 directions. And the other reason is because we can do breath while internal and external points of attention are active. So I can still be aware of my environment. I can still be aware of my body and my breath all at the same time. That's why this practice is so useful, because all 4 of these directions can be maintained simultaneously. 2 degrees, depending on how much attention you have in any one direction. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we get into opposing, basically what we could call opposing breaths, but I'll just frame it as yin and yang breathing. So we have the smooth breath, and then we'll have a yin and a yang breath. And now what this does is it starts to add, and it also starts to link our techniques. So now we're going to start to link breath with our cognition. And we already have internal and external, right? That's default. This is warrior training. At warrior training, you already have internal and external attention either elongated or maintained throughout the day. And if you don't, that's okay. This is just information that you can use for later. But that's where warrior training will really start to pick up, is because maintaining the breath is like, whoa, this is really tricky. Like internal, external, that wasn't easy, but I got there. But boy, paying attention to the breath is hard. That's why warrior training comes in, because we need a new frame of mind, one that is a little bit more get shit done. Like this is the way we gotta do this. So the yin and yang breath is still smooth. Don't forget that. All of the breaths, 2, 3, 4, and 5 will all be smooth. So that's a key point, that those will all be smooth breaths. Now, yang breath, any questions so far before I explain these 2 types of breathing? Is it still smooth? Yes. As smooth as you can make it. It's not always going to feel like this takes practice. So sometimes it'll be like, that doesn't feel very smooth, but that's okay. Just keep working with it. It gets better over time. Just like any skill, any practice, we improve. Easy peasy. Well, throughout our day, we may face a variety of different situations. And so this is situational breathing with a smooth breath that combines the cognition direction and a word that we don't use a lot until later in warrior training or other types of training, which is intention. Because intention is just a feeling. Right, Santina? It's all just a feeling. That's all we're ever talking about. If we put words to things, what are we doing? We're describing something that we have felt, something that we have experienced. I can only talk about this cup because I've experienced it. I can only talk about this camera on my desk because I've experienced it. I can only talk about an emotion because I've experienced it. If you're talking about something I've never experienced, I'm going to look at you like, okay, I guess I got to take your word for it because I don't know what you're talking about. That happens a lot on Facebook. I'll see some stuff and I'm like, okay, like maybe, but I don't know how that's supposed to, like, where does that chip fit in? I don't think it does. Okay, so yang breath. And we don't, I guess we don't have to talk about it in using the pinyin term yin and yang. We can, because there are no real English translations for that other than contextual opposites, but that's not yin yang theory, but that's also a different topic. So basically, yang breath is energy up. I'll write that in the chat. Yang breath is energy up. And that makes sense. Yang energy rises. Yang energy is get shit done, warming, sun, think sun. Yin is energy down. Think winter. Think things are coming inside the house now. Think the moon, or think the sun has set and the moon is coming up. I know it's not always like that, but you know, just kind of imagining it that way. So what's a reason during your day you would need energy up? Or am I just making that? Or is this just a bunch of fluff for you? Do you think that there are times during your day where you could use energy to rise? Things to increase, things to warm, things to move a little faster? Sure, yeah, I think so. You know, I'm at work, I have two people trying to check out, I have a thing of laundry that is coming out, I have a phone call because someone has a question that I don't have an immediate answer for. I got 15 things going at once, plus 4 directions of attention. And I'm like, well, actually, in that case, I might need to slow energy down. I think I just gave you an opposite example, but yeah, there will be examples. Okay, energy up the stairs, right? I got to go up and down those damn stairs. If I bring energy down, I'm probably going to make the task feel more difficult. So I need to get that energy moving. I need to get that energy moving so I have the chi and the ATP necessary to carry out that physical task. How we breathe affects our ATP, our chemical energy. How we breathe affects our cerebral spinal fluid. That's actually how it moves. Our breath is the pump for the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system doesn't have a mechanism that pushes it through other than gravity and breathing. So there's a lot of aspects that breath has on our body that's a little bit more subtle that we may not be totally aware of, that will begin to regulate when we do this practice. But that's more for the theory part of the practice. And theory, I use that word scientifically. I mean studies, data, that kind of stuff. Principles are a little, they could be a little bit more esoteric, but the moment of your practice allows so much ease to multitask. It does, yeah. And then you'll notice that we're not really multitasking. We're just quickly shifting our attention back and forth while holding other things in limbo, which makes it even easier to work with once you're really feeling you're not actually doing multiple. That's the 4 directions. If you have 3 different things or 4 different things in one direction, you can kiss your other 3 directions goodbye. So that's why it's so important to be aware in the way that we are with this practice. So now we're going to use a little imagination as well, right? So imagination with breath. How do you imagine it? I don't know. I imagine it like light. I like to imagine it. It's really a feeling now because the imagination portion of it was so long ago that I did it. Now it's, as Santina pointed out, it's just feeling. I don't need as much, you know. And the imagination is superimposed, such as imagining light and energy and chi moving in your body in a particular way. I would imagine chi moving up the cervical vertebra, because that's where I would feel a lot of tension. I could feel that that's where my plug up spot was for my energy to circulate. Right? So I would just smoothly breathe. I wouldn't try to change because that's manipulation. And then I would smoothly breathe and then go do something else so that I don't overly focus on one body area because that will make it more tense. So using the imagination, what do you think energy up would be like if we had to use our imagination with our breath? Probably up. Like the direction would probably, the energy we would, yeah, but expanding is a good one. Yeah, expanding is up and out in all directions. I can dig it. I think expanding would be a good one. We will get more technical with this because we can also start to do very specific things. I'm giving more of a broad overview of these different types of breath. But you can do what's called the micro or macrocosmic orbit, where you feel, well, first you imagine the energy kind of moving up your back and then down over the front on the exhale. So inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Well, when you get good at that, you can just move it quicker. You can move that circle quicker. And then that is a yang breath. Still smooth, but we're breathing with imagination. We're breathing with intention. What is the intention? To increase the yang energy of our body, like of our bubble of perception. We're hoping to increase the yang energy for whatever reason. I'm assuming that you have a reason to do that. And then what is yin? Same thing. It's just going the opposite direction. And for an opposite reason, right? Maybe you're wanting to wind down. Maybe there are too many things moving at once and it's starting to get really hectic. Root. That's what we mean by root. Breathe down. I have what's called kidney yin deficiency. All of my breathing is down into kidney 1 and kidney 3 in my feet. And that's actually taking this practice and making it medical, which, of course, I have about a year before I can start talking about it that way. All my colleagues say it's possible and improbable that a patient would be able to pay attention to their body to the extent to activate channels and acupuncture points. That everybody I talk to says it's possible. And everybody I talk to says you will not be able to get your patients to do it. They won't do it. They don't have the focus. They don't have the concentration. We'll see. I do agree that most of them won't. But there's going to be an Ida that comes into my office and they're going to be like, Ernest, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's change this. I don't feel like I want to feel. My life isn't going how I want it to go. I'm obviously in your clinic, so there's a physical health issue occurring. And so some people will just be like, I'm in it. Show me what I need to do. I'm going to do what you say. And then there's some people that will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then they never come back and they never do it. So I know that both spectrums are going to exist. My job is to make it available. I'm not trying to help people. I'm just making it available so that people can help themselves. Exactly, Santina. There is a point that is between it's in the perineum. So it's between the genitals and the anus. And someone's like, well, why the hell would anybody want to be needled there? When the pain and suffering gets to be high enough, especially in that area, people are like, fine, needle it. If that's what's going to help, and it does help. But we're not probably going to do that unless we need to. If you know where the perineum is, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's an anatomy class, warrior training. So do these two yin and yang breaths make sense? And does it also make sense why I would be including that in the type of breathing that we do throughout the day? Okay. Now the next two are a little bit medically. It's going to lead to something medical, but the way that I'm presenting it right now, it's not. But the next two breathing techniques will improve your health. I'm not healthy. I'm just gonna say that straight up. I'm not. I think that what I'm doing is I'm utilizing my practices to make the best out of the mess that I created. I made a mess of my body and my mind and my spirit. I made an absolute mess of it. So right now, I'm not Buddha. Like I'm not like, oh, I am the epitome of perfect health. Be like me. No. No, my practices are going to make sure that I can elongate my life. Without them, I'd probably be dead already, to be perfectly honest. So without my mind practice or my pursuit of mind practice, no, I would have overdosed a long time ago. But my practice now is helping me put things back together and make it as maximizing. Does that make sense? So I'll share this stuff, but don't look at me as the epitome of perfect health. Of course, Jerry. And I'm doing a part of the training that I will offer to you, but not yet. And it will be for get shit done factor. There's some things that we need to do first. So. Okay, so the next two types of breath, you could look at it as being medically, but it's not going to be around a diagnosis. So then I am not offering medicine. But of course, it will lend to the medical system when that time comes. And I am using, because I don't know how to talk about this in English. Well, I don't know how to talk about this in allopathic or Western medicine, because it doesn't really exist. So we are going to use the breath throughout our day to either tonify or clear. And I'm going to explain what that means, and I'll tell you how to use it. So tonify means to build up. So you know how we talk about in Chinese medicine, maybe you've heard this word deficient. That means exactly what you think it means. Qi deficiency means in that channel with that particular system, qi is deficient for whatever reason. We're not talking about the reason because there's probably a variety of reasons. But let's just say that one channel, let's say our lung qi deficiency. And I'm not trying to teach you Chinese medicine or anything. This isn't Chinese medicine related, but hopefully talking about it this way can help you understand what I'm talking about. So let's say something is deficient. Let's use Western. Let's say that we're vitamin, well, no, vitamins maybe isn't the best example. It is a good example, but well, tonify means to build something up where it doesn't exist. So if we have a little bit of something and we want to make it more of something, do this breath technique. And I'm going to tell you what it is. If you have too much of something and you want less of it, clear that shit out. Is that making sense? A goose, a swan, I think you'll also see birds in general, animals. When they have a buildup of energy, they shake it out. They disperse it. They get it out of their bodies. We do it too as humans, just not deliberately. When a person yawns, they're like, oh, fuck. And oh, I gotta swear every time I yawn. Does anybody know a person like that? All three of my brothers do that, or they used to. It's a similar type of thing. You know, they are regulating their energy. They're just doing it in a very habitual, unconscious, vulgar type of way. But it is still the same type of thing. They're using a word while they're, son of a bitch. It's like, wait,
Oh, that's
have you heard that before?
well, it's got a ring in a bell, but that's just so funny. And you said all three of your brothers do that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. My stepdad doesn't. He's a little bit more like me. Or quite accurately, I'm a little bit more like him. Someday I'll talk about the influence of my stepdad because I don't think that can be understated. Like I've always applied things to the mind. That's this weird thing that I came out of the womb with.
You talked
But
to him about it. You've talked about him in the past. I would
oh yeah,
love to hear more stories.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. My stepdad has a huge influence on my mind and the way that I look at the world. Okay, so sedating or clearing, maybe you lost your practice for a second and someone pissed you off. Do we want to tonify or do we want to clear? Do we want to build up or do we want to clear in that situation? You're irritated, someone just pissed you off, you're feeling energy rising, you want to clear it. What would happen if you tried to build up in that state? Could you make it worse? Yeah, like you can even actually make a situation more irritating, more angry. Exactly. So how do you do it? One way
You
is
could
a
build up.
go
You
ahead.
could build up with redirection and accomplish. Use it to your benefit. If you're redirecting as you're building up,
Yes,
you know what I mean?
yes, absolutely. Using this as a part of the redirection technique, heck yeah. Mhm. I don't think that a person would be able to do this right away as a part of redirection, which is why it's a part of warrior training. I think it would require a little bit more practice because what was the thing that we said? You have to be self-aware to redirect. And if you're not self-aware and you're in the midst of anger, chances are you're not going to see it until a little bit afterwards. And then, like Jerry said, now we could start to add that to our other two directions. And the way I'm talking about it, though, implies that you have at least two directions active. So, right, because this is warrior training. So I wouldn't talk about these breath techniques with somebody who's still looking to establish the first and second direction. I mean, I could talk about it, like they could watch this video, but I wouldn't recommend trying it, not really. Not throughout the day. You could practice the techniques, like as a part of redirection, like Jerry said, but really interacting with the smooth breath in this way throughout the day, it takes practice. And it takes a mind that has some space between words. I'm actually going to just phrase it like that for this group for a while, because it's one of the best ways to say it. We want to establish, elongate, and maintain space between the words in our mind. Like I can't make that anymore. That's the goal. That's what we're doing. That's the fourth major thing that this practice will help a person do, is to create gaps in the overall amount of thought. And that has been our mission since day one. It's been my mission for decades, even without knowing it. Does this make sense? So with my imagination, I imagine the breath. I imagine this thing clearing. I imagine it going out into the ether. If it's a part of redirection, I might even say it too, as a part of my internal mantra, my substitute dialogue, right? I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need it. I don't need this energy. I don't need this right now. I'm going to go back to my breath. I'm going to go back to my body. I'm back. All right. Here I am. I'm going to get rid of that. I don't need it. You can even, like, this is a brushing it off of your skin. Like get it out of your energy. Shake it out, whatever you gotta do. That's clearing and dispersing. And then building up, let's say that you're just a little down. It's not the worst. Like I'm not thinking anything. My energy's a little bit low. So I'm gonna use that yang technique to help bring my energy up. Okay, that's better. And now I'm gonna fill my bubble with energy. I'm going to fill it with my breath, my smooth breath, fill my bubble of perception. I'm going to imagine not dispersing, but really bringing in. Have you ever heard people do Qigong and they're like, breathe in the wonderful energy from the trees into your third eye? Do that. Maybe without all of the woo-woo kind of, but if those words help you, then use the words. But do that. Yeah, bring in energy from the outside that feels good. And that would be a tonifying, that would be building things up. And if you can get this basics down, I think you would be able to work with the system medically, because every single one of us have a deficiency and excess of something. There is no Buddha when it comes to medicine. Everybody has something. I don't care who the fuck they are. It's a I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but like when anybody shows me their tongue, I can't help it. I evaluate it. This is Chinese medicine. I can't help it. And so the other day I saw this vegan and they put themselves on a pedestal, like they are the epitome of perfect health. Their tongue says otherwise. And I could almost guess their symptoms. And if they're not feeling them now because they've only been a vegan for like a week, they will feel them eventually. The symptoms that I'm talking about, because I see it in their tongue. If it's in their tongue, there's gonna be symptoms that I can find. Either I'll find it in their body through touch, or I'll find it in their pulse, or they'll tell me. But if they're trying to,
What did that 1 week vegan's tongue look like? What was the coloring?
that would be getting a little bit. I think Shada would want me to stay on topic. Color of tongue. I'll answer that as soon as I stop the recording, though,
Oh, okay. No, keep going. I'll be quiet.
because I can answer that. But of course I can't. Lohan padding. I have heard of it, and one of the things. I think that's another way of just tapping, right? In Chinese medicine and in Qigong, we tap. And you can call it Lohan, and that's probably it depends, right? It depends on your intention, Santina, because you can actually pat to tonify. You don't have to pat to clear. You can pat to tonify, but I will admit that it's usually used to clear. It could be done even for physical symptoms. So nodules and things like that. But this is still a part of the clearing and the tonifying conversation, right? So you can add that to your breathing if you want. You can start doing so in Chinese medicine. If you have lung symptoms, I'm going to say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to put your hands together like this. On your thumb side, I want you to start patting down your arm. Every morning when you wake up in the morning, just give it a nice gentle pat down the arm on both sides for about 2 minutes. Do it again in the afternoon and do it again in the evening. And that's because the patting will help see, you could be clearing energy or you can be encouraging energy with that, Santina. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about tonifying and sedating. Tonifying is encouraging energy. Sedating and clearing is like, I don't want to encourage you. I want you to go. I want you to exit stage left. You don't need to be here. But tapping could be technically for both. It just depends on your intention. Because the tapping that I was giving the example of, you could be clearing nodules, probably not, like nodules in your arm. Most people wouldn't be able to perceive that anyway. They don't have the touch sensitivity to feel those types of nodules. But you could be, the tapping is vibration, and that's waking things up. So sometimes you'll see different tapping in Qigong, and that's actually not clearing energy, that's encouraging it to flow there. It's adding vibration. So it really just depends on your intention, but it can clear energy, it can build up energy, just like our breath. It really depends on our intention, right? What do we want to intend with this breath? So now with our breathing technique, we're adding intention, we're adding will, we're adding smoothness to help things move in a certain way. If a person can embody this breath, if a person can maintain this breath reasonably throughout the day, they're going to notice that their whole life starts to look like that breath. It starts to look more stable. It starts to look more appropriate to the circumstances that are actually occurring. It starts to respond in terms of tonifying, building up, and letting things go somewhat naturally. Like it starts to just do it. And you're like, oh, I'm along for the ride. If you're aware, you'll be along for the ride. because you have an active bubble of perception of internal and external awareness. If you don't have that, don't try to interact with your breath to this degree. If you are not maintaining, or at least significantly elongating the first two directions, I do believe that the breath will be too hard to try to maintain. It won't be hard to establish. You can establish on day one breath, of course. You can establish all four directions on day one. Elongate and maintain, that's a different story. And that's what we're learning to do here. We're learning to elongate and maintain attention on our breath. Use imagination with it. Now you have all four directions. You have all four directions active when you're using your imagination with the breath, assuming that you have internal and external. And one great way to look at this is the bubble of perception. That's what I call it. That's actually what Don Juan called it. I do talk about it a little bit differently, but I just like that term. Because that's how it feels. It feels like I'm creating a bubble around me of perception, awareness. All that makes sense? And throughout the rest of warrior training, I will refer to these five different breathing. It's really 4 techniques with smooth. All 4 of those are smooth. When we're tonifying, when we're sedating, when we're raising, when we're lowering. Now, if you have another breath technique that you want to use, because you just, reverse abdominal breathing, that's a Tai Chi breath, that can also be used to express power. That might be a good breath while you're going up the stairs. So you can still add other stuff. It's not just these breathing techniques. These will be the ones that are easiest to hold and to maintain. Right? Because if you're trying to do that deep abdominal breath, you're not going to do it all day long, unless you're sitting on a mountain with no distractions. And even then, probably not. That's why people have to excuse themselves from society and go off into the mountains and become monks, which is a very difficult physically life, but there are less distractions, and it does give you the opportunity to do things where you wouldn't be able to do it in our everyday situation. And if you did, you're going to get some stares. Like, people are going to look at you, which is fine too, if you don't mind. Any questions about any of this? Does this feel like something that you can work with to help establish and elongate the breath? Establish, elongate, and maintain breath attention. And then just to foreshadow, again, I'm assuming that we have at least 2 directions active. Now I'm assuming that we're aware of our breath most of the day. Well, how did we do that? We probably did it with imagination. We probably did it with the 4th direction. And that whole time, you're actually engaging all 4 directions, which will what? What will that do? You have imagination, breath, internal and external points of attention. What will that do? Without you trying, without thinking about it, without talking about it, we can use a little intention, that's okay. What will happen? That's one way to look at it, yeah, slow. Haps. What's the haps on the craps? Yo MTV Raps, that's an Ice Cube song.
Typing gaps.
Gaps. Okay, yes, that's it. That's the answer I was looking for. Yep. Gaps in the overall amount of thought. If not, eventually those elongated gaps to where we can maintain. And then I think what Santina wants to discuss, flow and those types of states where there isn't a lot of thought. That's where I think that's where Santina, where you're going when you're talking about things being all feeling, because all 4 directions have synthesized. It's what we would call harmony. It's what we would call going with the Tao, with rather than against. It's what we would call non-resistance if we're in a law of attraction group. Synergistic flow, whatever. But it's basically you're no longer being held back by your own mind. Thought, words is no longer holding you back. And you're a whole lot more aware of yourself, of your environment, which means that you'll have the opportunity to learn, grow, and evolve and still be totally different from everybody else. All that makes sense? Any questions about any of this? This is just the first little part of warrior training. So the fourth thing that we get from this practice, I don't have a fancy name for it. It's on the whiteboard, but do you remember the first one? What is the first thing I'm prepared to guarantee if you do this practice? At least one direction. You're probably noticing it. Shayna, do you know? What's the first thing I'm prepared to guarantee if a person can start to elongate and maintain one direction? That's okay. I'm a student too, so I know that it takes a lot to memorize stuff. This is worth memorizing though, in my opinion. It helps us to keep focus on what the hell we're doing. Basic concentration, improved self-awareness of ourselves in the moment as we're happening. 3, inner peace. Because if you're able to maintain a deliberate breath, I think that this word will be one that you greatly agree with. And just to clarify, Santina, that is a feeling. It's the feeling of a mind that is not at war with itself. We all know what it feels like, but not many of us are like super familiar with it. And then the fourth one is a result of the gaps, as Jerry put it. And this is where I am in my practice. I am in the cultivation factor of my practice. I maintain my breath awareness for at least 80% of my day. But the second that I wake up, I start to cultivate. Cultivate what? I think this is what Santina would really enjoy as a part of the practice. I cultivate feeling. We could call it feeling. I would prefer to call it state of being because it's emotional, it's electrical, it's chemical, it's circumstantial. It has to do with where I'm at in space and time. It has to do with where the planet is around the sun, where the moon is relative to the, so there's everything, the web that has no weaver goes into the state of being. Okay, Jerry, yep, we're almost done. I'll explain the tongue thing later then, because that was a Jerry question. It could be, that could be something that you cultivate. I call that quality. The essence of, the quality of the moment. The essence of is absolutely something that with no cognitive resistance, you can cultivate. But Santina, what does cultivate mean? Does that mean that it's just a thought? Do I just put that in the back of my mind? Is it just intention? Or is it your favorite word? No, you're right. No, it's not that stuff. If we're talking about it, then that must mean we're feeling it. So can you cultivate the essence of if you don't feel it? No. And if you don't feel it, what is likely interfering? Thought. And if there's something else interfering, then we probably just lack focus. Like pain. Pain can be interfering. But so we need to make sure that we focus our practice in a particular way so that we can move with pain rather than against it. My cultivation factor, there's several things. It's so into feeling, it's hard to describe, but I call it the Andy Dufresne principle. That's what I cultivate. From the second I wake up, from the time that I go to bed, I want to try to maintain that. And I lose it sometimes. I'm not maintaining it. But I can elongate. And I think that when we talk about this again in 10 years, I will be maintaining my essence much more than what I am now. No, we don't have specific homework yet, but we will. Actually, specific homework, start working with his best, because I'm going to ask questions. And so if you're not doing them, then you're going to have no answers. One part of warrior training will be, basically I want to get some feedback, some data. So I'm probably going to do, in Zoom, you can do polls. And so I'm probably going to do polling questions. That will be kind of, and your homework is to do the practice, but I'll get even more specific with that. But so the homework going into next week, I would really like you to practice with these 4 techniques, or these 5 techniques. Practice with smoothness in these 4 different settings. You're not necessarily whiteboard in group chat. Let me save that. Let me go back to that right now before I forget. I don't know if it saves automatically anymore. Whiteboard, whiteboard, whiteboard. Where is the save button? Ah, save. We'll save as a PNG. Okay. All right. So that whiteboard is saved. And I think that's all I have for you today. So we can come back tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's Monday, and I have a lot to do tomorrow, but that's okay. 5:30 to, we're going to talk about that last topic, which is the 5 modes. And it's called the 5 modes because of Ida. Otherwise, it was the 4 modes. All right, well, I will see you tomorrow if you can make it. We'll put this recording up to the Warrior Training channel. Have a good, yeah, it's kneeling / squatting / crouching. So it's kind of the in between. But yeah, it was squatting because you were like squatting in the garden. Yeah, and kneeling in the garden. Yeah. So both of those. And people kneel when they pray. So added it to the 4 modes to make it 5. Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow if you can make it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Goodbye.